Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I think Clive set the context, right? We still have questions on the credibility of the profession. So if we are in this room and asking ourselves, do we deserve to be called professionals, right? That's an interesting and a scary question. But part of the reason why we're still having this debate is, if you look at the last 5 years and what has happened in learning, essentially the businesses that we support and the business leaders that we work with have chosen to live with some level of mediocrity that we keep serving them year after year, right? So there hasn't really been a compelling event for L&D to say, hey, you know what, the roof is on fire, I need to do something now, otherwise I'm going to be irrelevant, right? So I run commercial training for Pfizer in India, and just to give you the context, what that essentially means is, we don't have a learning and development or an enterprise learning sort of a function. Everything that we do to enable employees, gets bundled under what we call commercial training. It's commercial because we've got 2,500 sales folks, and those of you who've been to Asia, specifically in India, we're a very large country, spread all across the length and breadth of the country, right? And we've got 2 physical offices in the country. So each of the sales guys, essentially an entrepreneur, working on the field, meeting our customers who are essentially healthcare practitioners, the doctors, the chemists, and everybody else in the entire healthcare supply chain. So the question, when we talk about learning at Pfizer, specifically in the Asian market, is how do you enable these guys? How do you create what we call sales enablement? And how do you leverage technology, modern workplace learning practices? So that's really what I'm going to focus about. And everything that I'm sharing today is already on Twitter, so I've scheduled all of these slides to be there. All the ideas you will find on my blog. And I personally think of Twitter as my personal learning management system, right? A lot of vendors don't like that when I say it, but I honestly think it's a great proxy for what good micro-learning should look like. So if you want to teach micro-learning to trainers in your organizations, I think the first thing to do is tell them to get onto Twitter, right? So big question, what are you going to gain out of the next 10, 15 minutes that you're going to spend having this interaction with me? 3 things. When it comes to modern workplace learning and then, the mechanics of how do you get teams aligned, how do you get them to think about all of these things, what are those right questions to ask? And then once you know what the right questions are, how do you gain momentum? How do you get started? What do you do? Right? You can go back from a conference like this to say, hey, that's the next big thing. Got to leverage technology, got to do something modern, but how? How do you do it at scale? How do you communicate those ideas to trainers? Who do you go to? What sort of a track do you create for them? Those are some of the things that I'm going to talk about. And then most importantly, how do you get executive buy-in? Because there's a little bit of a fog screen. You and I as learning professionals don't necessarily understand the entire landscape. How do you communicate something that's already ambiguous to the business so that they remain patient while you're making the investment in your teams to bring them up the curve, right? So in my view, that's what's happening in the landscape today, right? So what I've done is essentially bucketed that into the key changes. So if you look at the business side of it, we're seeing increasingly business managers becoming completely agnostic to the kind of metrics that we report, right? So we've actually stopped reporting things like number of people trained, training hours, because every time we go with a dashboard like that, the common question is, so what? What does all this really mean? So we've stopped putting that data so that we don't have to answer that question, so what? And number 2, beyond training, they're saying, well, you've got some skill sets within learning and development. What can you do beyond just training people? Can you become the employer brand advocate? Because a lot of people change companies because they perceive the other company provides better learning opportunities. So what is your role as a catalyst of the employer brand? L&D is supposed to have good communication and community management skills. So, hey, when we drive large-scale changes in the organization, what is the role that training can play? Can you become the change management catalyst? Can you partner with HR or the technology to, scale up change within the company? And then eventually, can you be supply chain managers of knowledge? And, I like what Clive said before. How do we move away from being an order taker to really a supply chain manager of knowledge? And when you think of the supply chain, there are so many assets within the organization. Formal, e-learning, training, but also informal, right? How do you leverage knowledge of people in the organization who've spent 10, 20, 30 years, right? How do you manage that tacit knowledge that's sitting within them? How do you bring that out? I think those are key questions. And then from a learner standpoint, the environment that we live in, how do you embed learning in the workflow? Because my 2,500 guys are in the field. Any time that I pull them out of the work, even to do a virtual classroom, is actually time away from a customer. So how do I ensure that within the day in the life of a sales rep, I can integrate learning moments without it being an interruption or something that they have to make time out for, right? That's important. And then performance support. And if we're talking about mobility, I'm sure you've been on the exhibition stand. How do you enable mobile learning, especially if you have a distributed sort of a workforce? And then you've got SMAC. How many of you have heard of that buzzword? Quick show of hands. Social, mobile, analytics, and cloud, right? That's the reality that we're all living in today, right? So if you go speak to vendors, you'll hear that a lot. How are you leveraging that in learning? What does social learning mean beyond having Yammer or Chatter or SharePoint in the enterprise? What does analytics mean beyond just putting out data from your LMS engine, right? So again, big questions. And then we are really seeing a transition from people bringing their own devices, what was known as BYOD. We're now seeing BYOL, people bringing their own learning, right? People actually coming up and saying, oh, presentation skills. I don't want to come to your course because there is a MOOC on presentation skills. Or there is a great TED Talk on how to deliver a better presentation in the Harvard video libraries. I want to watch that. So people are taking charge and saying, well, I not only want to learn the way I want to learn, I want to learn from who I want to learn, and I want that to be formalized within an enterprise. So again, challenging questions. And then most importantly, how are we rethinking design? Yeah. So really the analogy of, do you now have time to go back to business and say, well, I'm going to invest 6 to 8 weeks in designing a course, and by the time your course comes out, the business has changed, the competitive landscape has changed. So how do you take solutions to market quickly? What in the learning business we call rapid authoring. Launch something, keep it organic, and then you build it literally as you fly the plane, right? I think, I've just attempted to describe the key changes in the landscape. And these are my challenges. Give me a show of hand if any of these talk to you. If you work in an organization and these are, if any or all of these are things that you're trying to deal with. Okay. Well, clearly an heterogeneous workforce, but I think the one that's most important for us is proficiency greater than training time. So the only question that the business wants me to answer today is, you've invested time in training, you've done mobile, you've done e-learning, you've done social. Well, that's your problem. Can you answer a simple question? People that you've trained, are they more proficient today than they were yesterday? And are they going to be more proficient tomorrow than today? And if I can meaningfully answer that question with data, that's all that matters. They don't care the mechanics, they don't care about the technology that I use. That's the answer that they're looking at. And then obviously the correlation, or the holy grail of learning, ROI, which is, do more proficient salespeople produce better sales results? And often the answer to that is yes, right? So here was our challenge. This is a use case that I'm sharing with you. I spoke about the 2,500 folks that we had. A couple of years back, the first thing that we did was, we said, well, let's institutionalize technology, right, which is on the hardware side. So we gave an iPad, we gave a company iPad to all the 2,500 sales reps across the country. So everybody had the same device, right? But we didn't stop there. We said we don't want learning to get mobile and learning to be really technology enabled and the other parts of the sales process being left out. We said, how do you create an integrated experience for an employee with learning being one part of that experience? So the iPad became the single device that every single sales rep uses. Now what that really means is they learn on the iPad, so the mobility applications are sitting on it, but the CRM applications are also sitting on the iPad. So they're also reporting, stuff on Salesforce on the iPad. How many customers are they meeting? What type of conversations are they having? Which leads are they able to convert? And they're also performing their jobs. So all the marketing collaterals that they use when they meet customers are also sitting on the iPad. And that gave us a great interface to look at learning really in the context of business. So, the landscape in which you're learning is the same landscape in which you're consuming a whole lot of other information. So just at a design level, it becomes a lot more contextual. So clearly, with a workforce like ours, mobility was the way to go. So we identified that our learning strategy is going to be based around mobility. Okay? And this is quick interaction. When you think of the word mobility in the context of enterprise learning, what are some of the buzzwords that come to your mind? Sure, show of hands and then you could share. Mobility in the context of learning, what are some of the buzzwords you've heard at conferences like these or outside? Anytime, anywhere. Okay, we hear that all the time. Anytime, anywhere.
Performance support.
Performance support. At the moment of need. This is the year. I thought I heard that last year as well. That was the year of mobile learning. Okay. On demand. So you hear all of these buzzwords, and often people get confused about mobile learning strategy because you're trying to do everything. You're trying to create this perfect mobile learning strategy. So one of the first things that we did was identify what are we going to go after, right? What parts of mobile learning are we going to attack? Right? And that decision was based on two factors. The first aspect was, what is the maturity of the learner? Do you think that's important? What can the learner consume? What are they ready to consume? That's number one. And number two, what's the level of evolution of my trainers? Because who's going to create content assets for mobile learning? Are we ready? You can have the best devices out there, but if you don't have the ability to put out interesting user experiences, what does it mean? It's, the way I look at it is the iPad is just glass on paper if you don't have interesting applications running on it, right? So when we thought of mobility, you see all the buzzwords I've tried to list. I mean, this is stuff that you will hear. Micro-learning, chunking, bring your own device, social, gamification, analytics, HTML5, because today every course authoring tool will tell you that their tool designs learning for mobile as well. Right? But the ones that you see a phone symbol against are the ones that we decided we will go after. Right? We said we're going to focus on micro, social, gamification, and analytics. That's it. So the entire strategy is built around all these four elements. Okay? What that meant was you're able to give performance support to employees at the point of need, at a moment of time, on a device of their choice. Right? So if they want to use the company-provided iPad, that's fantastic. But if they do want to, engage with your content on their personal, smartphones, that's also okay. What that meant from enabling the team was this. We said, well, we've put together a mobile learning strategy. The first step is, how do we create a learning track for the trainers who need to learn how to create content, how to engage with technology, and then how to create meaningful learning experiences for the sales reps, right? So essentially four things. We said consultative partnering, you've heard that, performance support, but more importantly, curation and community management, right? This was new. How do you run a learning community, right, on your enterprise social? Now that's a skill that a lot of people don't have. And one of the key gaps is if you post a picture on Twitter or on Facebook, how many minutes or seconds does it take before you start getting likes? A few, maybe, right? Especially if you're on Facebook, you often start getting likes and responses instantaneously, right? And that's what sort of really creates the engagement. But go back to your enterprises. When you post a picture or a comment on Yammer or Chatter or Jive or what have you, often that comment or post can be sitting there for days together, and then you come back into meeting rooms and say, well, our enterprise social has no engagement, right? So part of the reason why it does not have engagement is because you're unable to create, what I call a consumer class experience within your enterprise network. So how do we train L&D? How do we train training managers who can actually watch the network, keep the traction alive, push the adoption? So again, that's a skill that our team had to learn. And the new media and digital skills. Most of us as trainers who are trained on instructional design are trained for e-learning. But how do you create content nuggets for an 8-inch real estate, the mobile phone? It's a different experience altogether. How do you communicate, in our business, how do you communicate scientific information in short 5 and 10-minute nuggets? Again, a different skill set altogether. We had to get our trainers together and upskill them and all. And innovative rewards. How do you keep the learner interested in the journey? Because we said no longer are we going to do classrooms, we're going to create tracks. And often that meant our tracks were 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, depending on the kind of skills people were learning. So very important that you have multiple pit stops within the track and people don't drop out. So what usually happens in our learning tracks is engagement levels may vary. So some people get very active on a certain pit stop and then they get very inactive on another one, but they stay the course. And it's a responsibility of the trainers to keep the engagement going throughout the track. So we identified that these are the skills we're going to build within our team. And then in 2014, we actually put together a 60-day track, not for the sales reps, but for my trainers, so that they become upskilled on all of these new age skill sets. And we essentially created a social learning experience for all of them. What we did was we partnered with another speaker here at Learning Technology, Jane Hart. Some of you may have heard of her already, who runs the Center for Learning and Performance Technology. And she runs a very interesting social learning workshop, right? She's actually based here in the UK. My team is based all over India. Nobody traveled anywhere. All of this happened virtually, right? So on not even our enterprise social, but actually on her own private Yammer network. So everybody enrolled into the course, and every week she will start assigning activities. And obviously, I had worked with Jane, given her a brief of what I'm trying to build. So week 1, we spoke about instructional design. Week 2, we spoke about micro-learning. Week 3, we spoke about mobile. Week 4, we spoke about social learning. And every week, trainers were actually expected to watch a few things, read a few things, comment on a few things, go experiment with a real audience, come back and share the experiences, right? And this is really how we went about. We said, if you want to teach a skill, then don't do a 1-day, 2-day workshop, then put them in an environment where by default, they have to actually practice the skill, report back on it, and then also learn how others are going about it. So, every week they will do the activities, and then we would have like a local meetup event, right? If we couldn't do meetups because people were spread out, we would do like virtual, on WebEx, we'd do meetup sessions and just talk about, hey, did you try out the QR codes? Did you try creating this 5-minute video? Or, we would start comparing and say, hey, this 5-minute product video looks really fantastic. What are the design elements? Part of the course, we started taking MOOCs, right? Just to understand, well, this is what good design should look like. So today, a lot of our e-learning design is actually influenced by some of the best MOOCs that are available in the market. The way we design assessments today actually are influenced by what popular quizzing apps like QuizUp do. So we created an entire assessment engine copying the mechanics of QuizUp. Our e-learning today mirrors what you see today on a lot of the Coursera and edX MOOCs. So essentially the logic was simple. The logic was, if enterprise technology has to look like consumer technology, and that's an aspiration that most organizations have, your people need to be completely invested in consumer technology. So do trainers understand platforms like Twitter? Do trainers understand TED Talks? Do trainers understand MOOCs? Right? So one of the challenges we actually gave our trainers was, I'm sure most of you would have heard of this platform called Udemy, udemy.com, where you can host your own MOOC. We said, well, go create a MOOC of your choice, and it's free of cost. Go create a MOOC, host it, and the challenge is who gets the maximum number of enrollments, right? I mean, free open market. So clearly, you're putting your design skills to test, but not within the enterprise environment, but out there in the market. And obviously we had winners, we had a reward mechanism, but what that did was that told trainers, this is what good learning design looks like. Because when you're pushing out e-learning, keep in mind that your learners are not comparing your e-learning module with the one that they have experienced in the previous organization. They are comparing your e-learning with the MOOC that they're already taking. So that's the standard that you need to sort of beat. When you push a corporate video, it's being compared to the YouTube experience they have. So if it isn't as good or as engaging, then you know exactly why your corporate videos are not getting the views, right? So that is our challenge. And as you can see, all of this happened on the entire enterprise social platform that we have. And we also started encouraging trainers to do a lot of video blogs. So just as part of the whole experience, trainers actually started creating user-generated content, talking about their experiences. And this came in really handy because today, when we have to teach skills to our sales reps, 80% of our content comes from the sales reps, not from the trainers. So it's not a trainer sitting in a head office, creating a fancy video and pushing it out. What we essentially do is identify who are the best sales guys and tell them, hey, do you want to just take up an iPad, do a quick selfie video, talk about how do you describe this product to a customer because you seem to be getting results, right? All that we do at the back end is to just edit that video, make it look good, make it a little consumable, annotate it if required, and it goes back. And I can tell you the kind of traction that it generates is far superior than what it would if a trainer were to create the video because everybody watches that video and say, hey, this is a guy I know. This is somebody just like me now getting into a teaching role because he's doing well. So people actually think of it as a recognition opportunity, but I think from a content standpoint, it works a lot better, right? But again, we had to really train our trainers to think like this so that they can start orienting themselves. Great, I'd like to wrap up. So really, that's a question for all of us. We've got to be asking that. I mean, the landscape obviously is changing. We need to reimagine. It's an open question. Are we ready, right? Happy to keep the conversation going. That's why you'll find me on Twitter, and all the ideas are available on my blog. So thank you very much for your time.
Sunder, thank you very much. Do you want to sit up here, then everyone can see you more easily, probably, from down here. We've got 10 minutes roughly, to slightly more than 10 minutes, to examine this issue of what it means to be a professional, what skills we require, and the other questions around it. Are we ready? Do we have the infrastructure in place, and so on? Are there any burning questions from the floor that anyone wants to throw out immediately? If not, I've got one which I'm going to put to both these. Yes, go ahead.
I don't know if it's burning, but it's a question. Sunder, thank you.
Yep.
About L&D, is that very much commercial business L&D professionals? And if it was, what are some of the differences in other bits of Pfizer? I'm thinking manufacturing, compliance, other types of training.
Rob, can I just repeat that back to make sure, because I'm not sure everyone heard it. Sorry, actually, could you repeat it? Because I didn't hear it.
Is everything you've described just for commercial L&D people? And if it's not, how does that marry with some of the other L&D professionals that perhaps sit elsewhere in Pfizer?
Yeah, so what I've actually described is the entire enterprise learning architecture. It's just that we call it commercial training. So in that framework, even leadership training comes in. So just to give you an example, we actually leverage a lot of modern workplace learning practices, even in leadership training. One of the examples I can give you is we've signed up with Udemy, right? So every user has, Udemy credits, essentially. They could go and learn whatever it is that they want to learn. But we also then curate courses. So for example, just about a few months back, every time somebody would get promoted into a managerial role, they would get sent out to a 2-day classroom version of what we used to call, Excel, advanced Microsoft Excel skills training, right? Now, that's actually available as a MOOC on Udemy. So today what we do is everybody who becomes a manager actually goes and takes up that MOOC, and then we blend that with virtual classrooms. So you do a 6-week-long MOOC, spend about an hour watching the videos every week, and then you come into a virtual classroom session for 1 hour again every week. So if you look at the investment of time over a course of 6 weeks, you've done what, about 12 hours of worth of time, but it's really spread out. So it's still lesser amount of time compared to a 2-day classroom, but a lot more effective, because when you come into the virtual classroom, we're actually able to then push out a lot of use cases and say, well, you've learned how to do pivot tables. Well, your job requires you to do pivot tables, and this is the context. Can you show how to do it in the virtual classroom to all the other peers? So, it really sort of gives us the flexibility to do this at a skill level. At the managerial level, we use it as well. We have Harvard Managed Mentor, which is part of the enterprise learning architecture. So anybody who's looking for leadership skills gets aligned to various Harvard Managed Mentor platforms and courses that are available.
So it's not just for salespeople. Yeah. This is for people across the board. Okay, good. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Thanks to both of you, by the way. Appreciate it. Clive, I expect a refund because I think I've bored you. But a quick question about the professionalism angle, which I 100% agree with. So it's not necessarily a criticism, but it's more what I do worry a little bit about in organisations. I think ours would be one of them. Is stakeholders, senior people are suddenly having all of the support functions turning into partners, and a big change is happening. I do think there's an element of potentially needing to deliver things as well. I think there's a balance within there, rather than being potentially overly ideological about exactly how you operate, and maybe you need permission to move up that ladder.
Yeah.
Did everybody hear the question okay? Yeah.
It was long-winded.
Yeah. No, I know. I do understand your point, but I don't think it is idealism. I think we're trying. It's just trying to give better value for money, because if you have a legal department in your organisation and your senior managers go to the legal department because they're about to make a big merger or something like that, and the legal department says, I definitely don't recommend that you do that because there are some serious legal consequences, but then you just completely ignored it. That would be very hard to imagine, wouldn't it? The legal person has the interest of the company at heart, but the best way they feel of expressing that is by suggesting something different from the management view. So I think even if it does slightly delay implementation, you're going to get much better, you're going to be doing better things. That's the point. Sometimes you don't need to be doing anything at all. So an awful lot of training doesn't need to be done because actually people are perfectly capable of picking things up for themselves. And sometimes, equally, we underdo training. So we try and do things far too fast, like teach people new skills, but never give them enough time to practice and things like that. So I think that by bit by bit edging up our level of credibility and becoming more of a really savvy, trusted consultant, we will deliver much better value to our organisations. But it will take time. And this isn't a switch you flick. It's a gradual building of credibility by just being able to ask the right questions and show confidence that you can edge people towards more sensible solutions than they would buy at face value. It's hard.
Just to, if I can add on to your
Yeah,
point.
sorry.
One of the things we've tried that sort of has worked really well, a little bit of a disruptive idea. So about a couple of years back, we were never getting invited to the important business meetings, right? So we decided, so when I joined the company, I would ask my team members, well, why aren't we invited? Because if we have to be partners, then we need to be clued in what the business strategy is. And they said, well, learning never gets invited. So one day we just decided a couple of years back, we're just going to breach into some of these meetings, right? We said, well, what's the worst that can happen? Your colleagues, you work in the same company. And often, in large meetings, people really don't know who else is invited, right? So one fine day, myself and a colleague of mine, and she and I just went into a meeting, sat with the CEO, and it was a strategy meeting, and everybody thought that we were supposed to be there, right? And guess what happened from the next time on, right? We were on the list because the CEO's admin took note of the fact that, oh, maybe I missed out these guys, and we were on every other meeting. So I think sometimes it's just a leap of faith. If you think that you're not being treated as a partner, just barge through the door and just make it happen. So that works sometimes as well.
Okay, that's
Great idea.
One very practical tip. Yes. Was there? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I guess it's to build on that because I think the essence of your credibility has to be on what you deliver,
Yeah.
not just in the influencing
Yeah.
part. I think that's where it kind of closes
Yeah. But I think there's I agree with you, but I think there's a lesson in that too, is that we have to be really good at measuring what we do. I know it's an old cliche about evaluation, what have you, but being better at measuring our what we do, what value we do add, because as you say, that gives us the credibility then to challenge decisions in the future. But if people say, "What have you ever done?" then we're in a very weak position.
And better still, if somebody says, "What have you ever done?" and somebody else on the management team says, "Well, this is what they did for me." That's where it comes from. And I've seen countless times people not approaching this from the point of view of professionalism or skills, but simply saying, "What's our job? Where do we add value in the business?" Doing that, and then finding themselves getting invited to meetings, doing the right thing, and becoming professionals without knowing it, because they are, as you say, delivering and being a critical friend to the business. I've got that, still got that burning question, which I'm even more burning to ask, but does anybody else have anything they want to throw up to these guys? Because I want to ask them, if you are in the audience now and you're going back to the office, you know what's coming, don't you? Right. I'm going back to the office. What's the one next thing I do to either build the skills or develop the profession where I am? Well, that's very nice of you. Yes.
If it was me, I would get together the other, learning professionals that I work with and check with them whether they believe that the issues that are in your mind are the issues that they're facing and whether they agree with you. And then work with them to try and see what could be done in your very particular case to resolve the problem. I think in many cases I think the core skill is a consulting skill. And I think that I would probably look to address that skill first. I actually don't think learning about technology is really a particularly fruitful thing.
Although, of course, attending conferences in the field is a very valid
But to be
approach.
honest, we're not talking so much about technology. We're talking about the reasons, the applications.
Yeah.
I don't think there's very much benefit in learning about technology itself and the nuts and bolts and how it works. But I actually think probably the core skill is a consulting skill. And having the confidence to consult, and I would probably do everything I could to provide circumstances in which people could be coached to become better consultants. But the underpinning that is a much better knowledge of evidence-based learning theory. And that's something people can work on individually, I think.
So you have to have a knowledge and an attitude towards evidence-based learning and a particular skill on top, consulting.
Yeah.
And that's what you'd work towards. And
I think so.
So I would say two things. I actually think technology is important, but I think we sort of misunderstand what that really means. I would say consumer technology, right? And consumer technology is built for regular people like you and me. There's actually nothing technical about it, right? So as a starting point, are your trainers, are your L&D practitioners clued into various consumer technology platforms, because they're great proxies for what good design should look like. They're great proxies for what good experiences should look like. And I think that's the business in which we are in. Are we creating engaging design? Are we creating engaging experiences for our learners so that they can learn from it? That's number one. Number two, when you go back, talk to your teams, just clue down to 3 or 4, don't just go and say, we're going to do modern workplace learning, right? Because a lot of people can get overwhelmed. What does it mean? So depending on the context in which you operate, the business in which you operate, you could say, well, we're going to go after micro-learning and social learning because those are the two most relevant things. Or we're going to go after mobile learning, as an example. So pick out 2 or 3 areas, create a learning track, and then leverage all that is available on the open source. You actually can do quite a bit without having to invest significant amount of money. So whether it's platforms like what Jane Hart has created, or all the virtual training sessions available via the LPI, there's actually a lot of free content out there. It's just that we don't leverage enough of it. So those are good places to start.
That's great, thank you. It's good to have concrete places to start, and I do believe that the consulting skill is, for me, the key skill that makes the difference, combined with that confidence, but they go cyclically together. As soon as you start having the consultative engagements, you build the confidence because people are listening and so on. Lots to take away from that. I found it very useful, guys. We are 1 step forward on my 20-year journey. Maybe I'll cut it down to 19 years and 6 months now, I don't know. But guys, can you give a big round of applause, please, to Clive and Sunder?